And finally, I'd like to introduce Kristopher King. Chris is an Aiken native. I think, is his dad here? Someone was here. Yeah, back there. Has a master's in historic preservation from UPenn. For the last 25 years, he's been managing hundreds of historic properties under conservation easements, worked on numerous projects, and helped lead the turnaround of the Preservation Society of Charleston. So with no further ado,
Good evening. Thank you. It's great to see so many familiar faces out here tonight. So I know I'm the last thing between y'all and cocktails and dinner, so I will keep that in mind. But I really want to sort of bring this conversation back to Aiken. And so, you know, you've heard a great deal about preservation economics. You've seen some great state examples. But let's talk about what we have here. You know, Donna talked about the equestrian community. You know, when you look at Aiken, it is a very special place. It is unlike many places because there's been this great continuity of people and place and use and tradition. I have to put a picture in of my children, second generation riders in the Aiken Horse Show, but there are families that are fourth and fifth generation riders in the Aiken Horse Show. This is part of what makes this place unlike anywhere else in South Carolina. So you have this incredible quality here that is so unique to Aiken, from the racing and the polo, tremendous architecture, great institutions, but you also have this incredible downtown. And there's a reason. Aiken is different from almost anywhere else, and I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, we have great buildings. There have been some great renovations and investment in downtown. And in my life, I've seen a lot of change in Aiken. When I was a kid, the Wilcox was abandoned. And this was it as it was beginning its renovation in the 80s. And here it is, obviously, today. Everyone's familiar with it. Across the street, another building that was abandoned. My brother and Benton Kofer got arrested for breaking into the building because it was really fun. I was quick enough and got away. But, you know, what a great building. Can you imagine if this had been torn down? And, you know, change is not a bad word. Sometimes, you know, change is a good thing. I used to play basketball at St. Angela's, and it was interesting why a school was built on a residential street, but when the school was decommissioned, ultimately it was replaced with a house that fits into the neighborhood, I think, incredibly well. But downtown is really interesting, and it's been great to sort of talk with this group and think about it. But for me, as a kid, you know, Aiken's always had a lot of business. There's always been a lot going on. Wasn't a lot of diversity of business as a kid. There wasn't a lot that interested myself and my friends. But to come back now and to see the variety of shopping, the outdoor dining, it's unbelievable for me to come home and see how successful downtown Aiken is. And I'll take a quick step back. As we all know, Aiken was a sort of a railroad town, right? And there's a reason, so bear with me. But Aiken, you know, William Aiken built the rail line from Charleston to basically this area to get to the Savannah River to steal all the goods going down the Savannah River from the port of Savannah. Well, his railroad engineers were sort of laying out some towns as they went along. Well, in this period, Thomas Jefferson had been espousing the benefits of trees and healthy living and outdoor living, you know, because obviously cities were pretty dirty, sick places. So the first town they laid out, the engineers, was the town of Somerville. The idea was alternating blocks of parks and development. Well, from the very beginning, it didn't work because they couldn't stop the private interests from buying up the parkland and developing that too. So it never really achieved its success. So when they laid out the city of Aiken, they determined, okay, we're going to take this public benefit, this park space, we're going to put it in the right-of-way, so no one will ever be able to get it. And so Aiken has an absolutely unique, one-of-a-kind city plan. You will not go anywhere else in this country or world and find a town that is like Aiken, because this idea of parkways and trees and air and health was a key driver. And with downtown, what it did is gave you this incredibly wide right-of-ways. You know, you go out to Utah and out west, and maybe you'd find right-of-ways that wide because, A, they had snow mounds when you plowed the street that are 20 feet tall, but also to turn a stagecoach, and I'm in Aiken, so most of y'all will get this, but to turn a stagecoach with 12 horses pulling it requires a large turning radius. So you see that in western towns. They have really wide streets for that very reason. But Aiken almost looks like you're looking at a historic photograph out west because of that. But you know, this is very much the character of the residential neighborhoods, and you're in this park-like setting. But it also comes downtown as well. That DNA carries right through downtown Aiken. And to see the trees and the growth that's happened in my lifetime, and a lot of the rainwater projects, and you know, it's really neat what's happened. And again, you won't find this anywhere else. But it's the DNA of what makes Aiken different and special. So as we look downtown, you know, you have these great right-of-ways, and as I said, they've gone through periods of disinvestment, you know, aesthetically not its highest point. You know, the street trees, it shows you the incredible impact. But I love this, there's an old theater building there, and that was Aiken Sporting Goods when I was a kid. I think it's Remax now, but it's the building with the vinyl siding on the front, which I've always wanted to just peel that off and see the historic facade behind it. But you've always had a lot of businesses downtown. This is a great photograph. Again, not as beautiful as it is today because of the trees, but look how vibrant downtown Aiken was and is. So we're very fortunate to have the quality downtown that we have. But you know, like most places in the 70s, you know, a lot of that retail activity moved out to the suburbs. So for Aiken, it was the Calmia Mall. And I can remember as a kid, this is where we would go to Rose's and shop. But it obviously sort of went out of favor. In the same period, the building right next door to us, because there wasn't a lot happening, they were going to cut a hole in it and park cars in that. And that's a Stanford White designed building, who's one of the most famous architects in the world, and that's one of 10 tennis courts in America. And can you imagine if they turned it into a parking lot? It would have been unbelievable. But then, right, the Aiken Mall, which as a kid, this was fantastic. We didn't have to go get everything in Augusta. This is progress. You know, it never sort of hit its stride, and obviously it's going through its own redevelopment. But you know, when I look at Aiken compared to when I was a kid, there is so much more here. Options, variety, shops, it's unbelievable. We just didn't have that growing up. So Aiken is incredibly healthy. You're in the catbird seat because Aiken is vibrant. People want to be here. People want to invest here. That is the best opportunity, and it's about making wise decisions. But downtown, as I said, it's just unbelievable to see the quality of this place and also the incredible potential that it still has. And you know, those that market communities really get it, right? This is from the Aiken Visitor Bureau site, and this is what they're selling, right? The sporting South, you know, the racetracks, the historic properties, the farmers market, downtown. And you go further and they talk about things to do. It all comes back to downtown. I love this. A trip to Aiken means getting outdoors, experiencing history, meandering through beautiful parks and bustling shopping. And you know, you'll see a thriving downtown that has much to offer. I mean, folks, things are good in Aiken. And you know, and obviously here's the Christmas time. So you have so much going on, but it's recognizing what is also unique and special. You have these incredible properties, these great wide right-of-ways that are great for parking, great for street trees. You know, there's been some great reinvestment in some buildings, you know, and each one of these is just a sort of gift to the street, a gift to the block, and becomes an anchor for lots of positive development. But they're great buildings downtown. You know, they're big buildings, there are some small buildings. I mean, this is such a fantastic little building that really should be seen as a core asset. And so, you know, when I look at downtown Aiken and I put on my architectural, my preservation hat, I see somewhere that's like nowhere else. You have all of these resources, and there's so much economic development opportunity that's still available. So I was really surprised when I saw a project that just seemed counter to all of that. And you know, these ideas of big convention center, you know, big hotels, it's been done all over the place. It's just, they don't work. They don't ever deliver what they promise to deliver, but they will forever alter the character of your downtown. So, but change is going to happen, right? And change is not a bad thing, but there are two ways you change. One is you change by choice, or you change by chance. And so in Aiken, you have good ordinances. They haven't necessarily been enforced terribly much recently. But you need an assessment of what you have. You need to understand these resources. You need to make sure that the ordinances are able to keep up, because the bottom line is developers have more money and better lawyers than they ever have in the history of development. And communities are stressed. I live in Charleston, and it's something I dealt with every day for a decade. And it's never ending, the impouring of money and what they're trying to sort of get done. But one of the things that you really need is to think about bringing more tools. Tax benefits that you've heard both the previous speakers talk a lot about. There's so much opportunity to bring more tax benefits to Aiken. You have a local district, but not a National Register Historic District. And I will say this, the National Register District does not bring any controls. It doesn't make you do anything that you're not already doing, but it actually opens you up, homeowners and business owners, to tax credits if you actually reinvest in your building. So these are really important things that need to be put on the table. So for renovation tax credits, it's massive. It's a massive industry. In 2020, there was $7.3 billion worth of these projects done in this country. I think it was about 26, 27 million of them happened in the state of South Carolina. And 30% of these projects happen in communities that are under 50,000 people. I mean, they're tailor-made for communities like Aiken. So if we had National Register status for many of these buildings, what we would be able to look at is you have the federal credit, which is a 20% tax credit of the work you spend. And then on top of that, there's a state credit that's either 10% or 25% capped up to $1 million, so depending on the scope and scale of the project. We also have an abandoned building credit in South Carolina, which can be up to 25% of the value of a building. And then there are also some, the Bailey bill, some great bills that actually help freeze property taxes at your pre-developed rate as opposed to your post-development. So quick look at a project down in Charleston. This was Jim and Nick's Barbecue on King Street. We realized that unfortunately when they built the building, they never connected the facade to the rest of the building, and it was falling into the street. And for a tourist town like Charleston, not good when your facades start falling on your tourists. So they came out and said it's got to be demolished immediately, and they said time out. They brought out Craig Bennett, who's one of the best preservation engineers, who looked at the Hotel Aiken. When the Washington Monument was cracked during the earthquake, Craig Bennett was who they flew up to look at that, by the way. But he came out and they said this building's absolutely salvageable. It's not going to be easy. So they did this, and just as an example, if this was a $10 million project using the tax credits, basically $5.5 million of credits were generated by this project. So what this means is that preservation becomes very competitive with new construction. Very important. One of the great minds and thinkers in urbanism and character and power of place is a guy named Ed McMahon with the Urban Land Institute. And he always talks about understanding these assets that you have, this power of place. And he talks about Rockville, Maryland, which a historic community that they demolished most of their downtown in the 70s to build a mall. Yeah, not the best idea. Well, they fixed the mall and they redeveloped the mall, and this is the new town center. So, the reality is they did make one decision that was better than the other, but we hopefully won't ever go down paths like that if we don't have to. But he, I will say, like Don, have gone all around the country talking about understanding assets. Walkability is so important. He gave you the economics, the understanding of it, but what it is it just creates places that are in demand, that people just intrinsically connect with and feel more towards than places that don't. We talk about historic buildings. These are incredibly underutilized assets. You've seen many examples tonight of that already. It's also thinking about what you're marketing, what you're selling. Tourism's a part of it, but you can think of this in broader terms. You can either go after the sort of mass market approach, or you can go after the more sustainable approach. And that's where a word like authentic is so important. You have something in Aiken that you don't get in anywhere else. That's why these streets are packed during the holidays with shoppers. So it's about quality, not quantity. And what we know for a fact is this is going to give us a far greater yield. You're going to have basically less wear and tear, higher dollar per visitor, and there's a great benefit for the small businesses and everyone that's involved in this. And so we also know that hotel chains, and corporate America sort of gets this. I mean, sometimes they get it and they kind of miss the mark a little bit, but they understand that unique, distinctive, funky, weird, these are things that particularly millennials and younger generations love. And so you're seeing a lot of hotel redevelopment happening in really odd, tricky, funky old buildings, because it's clear that people would rather stay in a place that's unique than a place that's like everywhere else. So these are Ed McMahon's sort of secrets to success, and I just want to share them because I think they're so relevant. Number one, develop a shared vision for the future. Inventory your assets. Build plans around the enhancement of those assets. Use education, incentives, partnerships, initiatives, not just regulation. Pick and choose among development proposals, because as I said, the going's good. You're in the catbird seat. Don't settle. Pick good developments. Cooperate with neighbors, protect your community character, foster an authentic sense of place, and have strong leaders and concerned citizens. So quickly, from where I live in Charleston, everyone thinks that this is the preservation capital of the world, and it is in many senses. It's where the preservation movement started. But it has been so weakened by these corporate and national and international developers coming in, pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars. It's there for one reason: profit. And so in Charleston, they've weakened all of the preservation rules that we've had for 100 years. We now see what are called rocket houses. They're houses that are being squeezed in the old houses. That looks like it's about to take off. And then they've also maxed out all the building envelopes. And so they're selling properties that are so much larger than the historic buildings. And the city council actually allowed taller buildings. And so we've had all these new hotels and all these new apartment buildings just all over downtown Charleston. And it's honestly barely recognizable that the city it was just 10 years ago. And this is when the getting has been best. Also, we struggle with tourism because it's become such a key driver that short-term rentals are a big issue for us. We lost 15% of our houses in downtown Charleston to short-term rentals. It's not housing anymore. They're little hotels. So the cost of housing and housing affordability, attainability is gone in Charleston. But it's a bigger problem that happens with that, because you don't have neighbors full of residents. So we don't have a hardware store in downtown Charleston anymore. We're down to one grocery store. The businesses that cater to locals go out of business because tourists don't shop at these same businesses. So it's changed Charleston a lot. Two quick hotel examples. This was a new hotel that was built about 10 years ago at the north end of King Street. This was to be the new Charleston Place, to bookend King Street from Charleston Place. And this is what they built. If you notice, there are no doors out to King Street, so it's kind of dead on the street. It's not very Charleston-like in its architecture and its materials. You go in a courtyard to access, so it sort of turns its back on the city. But these are the rooms, perfectly nice, but you could be anywhere. This is the lobby. And this is the swimming pool. And unfortunately, this area has deteriorated rapidly over the last decade and has become an area of crime such that they actually close King Street, this section of King Street at night, and don't allow cars to drive through it because there's been so much violence. It's not the hotel's fault, but if you had a business that was diverse, that brought in other local businesses that had 24-hour activity, these things become self-regulating and self-policing in a lot of ways. Here's another example, just down King Street. This is the Restoration Hotel. They restored the historic building on the left, built the new building on the right, which is actually a tower. You can see it's taller than the historic building. It goes up 5 stories in the back. This is a hotel that gets a room rate double of the hotel that I just showed you. And these are some of the public spaces that you can walk in and sit down and read the paper and have a coffee. There's a coffee shop and there's a rooftop bar. You go here for a drink or coffee, you run into people from Charleston every single time. They didn't have room for a pool, so they built this little 3-foot deep pool on the roof. How many people you think are Instagramming photos from the pool at the Hyatt Hotel that I showed you a minute ago? Where I can guarantee you this pool probably, use per square foot, is probably the most active pool in the state of South Carolina. So it's about understanding opportunity. It's not easy, it's not direct, but you have tremendous opportunity by investing in that which you have, that which makes your place unique and special. And you need a plan to do that. And I was talking with a friend of mine, an urban designer, Kristopher from Savannah, and they were hired and came up here and worked, and he said, oh, I love Aiken. We worked up there in 2003. They came up and did this master plan for the Chesterfield in-town neighborhood, which is much of the residential area just adjacent to where we are, and the town and the plan picked up a little bit where we are, and they proposed, take what you have, protect your parkways, plant more trees in your parkways, plant more street trees, build houses and infill buildings that are like the ones you have, because A, you've got the room to do it, and B, it's going to make it that much of a better community. And so they developed some typologies, and these were the more urban ones that were proposed for right around where we're standing right now. And I'll just zoom in on this, the town core. You can see their rendering of what they felt was appropriate for downtown Aiken. Street level retail, 2 to 3 stories, doing targeted infill, doing on-street parking. These are the lessons that great urbanists come here and get instantly. This is what we should be looking at and thinking about as we continue to develop downtown Aiken. Lastly, does anyone know where this is? It is Charleston. This is a rendering of what, when you drive into Charleston 2 years from now, this is what you will drive into. Pretty much all of these buildings except the 2 on the right have been built or are being built. And so again, change is going to happen. It's about how you're going to do it, how you want it to happen. There was an editorial in the Washington Post this summer by Kathleen Parker that basically said, I'm a stranger in my own town. And that's the sense of a lot of folks that live in Charleston because it has changed so much. They so prioritized economic development and tourists over residents, when the reality is if you actually invest in things that residents love, guess what? People are going to come twice as fast to experience that. The last thing I'll say, I was up a few weeks ago with my children, and we had a soccer tournament in Augusta, and I grew up spending a lot of time in the Bowery, probably too much. But this was the first building that I actually worked on as a kid. We stripped all the paint off the building, exposed all the historic brick, loved it. You'd go in there, you had the silks, the racing silks on the wall and the pictures and old Aiken. It was of this place. And I took my kids in there for dinner, and this was the experience. And they loved the pizza, and I did recognize the Sesame Street character on the TV, but that was the only thing I recognized. So again, it's about understanding what makes this place special and unique, and it goes into buildings, it goes into small businesses. You have an incredible community here. I love this town, and it's great to be back, and thank you for bearing with me.